Welcome to DIYEasyCrafts.com, how to make a big cleaver. Now this particular knife is designed to have a very rustic looking blade. I also made some wood chip micarta scales for it, or handles for it, so it has a very unique look to it, to say the least. It is a big knife. It's made out of 1095 high carbon steel, weighs almost a pound. Now, making it was actually pretty easy compared to some other knives. I've done a variety of these textured knives recently. I've done some that are hammered. I've done some that are ground with a Dremel grinder, and I've even done some etched ones. This particular knife started with a sheet of 1095 3/16 thick, which I got from Granger. And then I basically just drew the shape of the knife, and this is actually the customer's design, onto that material, and then I started cutting away with a angle grinder or a disc grinder with a cutoff wheel. And the object here is to just stay outside of the line and to cut away as much material as possible. It'll reduce the amount of sanding or grinding on the belt sander later on. So on the inside of the handle, I just cut straight in, and then I'm just slowly cutting away each one of those pieces, and you end up with something like this. It's still very rough, still has a lot of sharp edges. Then I went over to a 2x72 belt sander. This one is one that I made, and there's actually a video on that whole process. And I'm going to just finish forming the outside shape of that blade right on that belt sander. I'm using an 80 grit paper. And that was one of the other concepts with this knife. I wanted to do the whole knife with the same belt, the same 80 grit. So I'm going to shape the handle, the curvature on the back of the handle, and I'm also going to, start to shape the inside curve. The inside curve's not all that easy on a 2x72, but I'll get the rough shape done, and then I'll finish it up with a little Dremel grinder. But whatever you can do on the 2x72, it just goes a lot faster. This thing moves a lot of material, very quickly. Now, the concept here was to put some marks, some hammer marks, into the blade after it was shaped, and then grind the bevels. That's not what happened. I hit it a couple of times with the ball peen hammer. There was still a sharp edge or two on this particular blade, and I ended up slicing my finger. Basically what not to do when making a knife. But that kind of threw me off my game. So when I came back to finish pounding the hammer marks, I never turned the camera back on. So unfortunately, I'm just going to talk you through how I got these marks. There are 3 different types of marks on this blade. There are the small round divots, kind of a straight deep mark, and then also some scratch marks. So the round divots are just hammer marks with a ball peen hammer. These were done cold. I didn't heat up the metal at all. Just put it on a flat surface, back of a vise, and hammer away. The deep straight marks are done with the flat end of the hammer, and I'm just not hitting flat. I'm hitting kind of at the edge, and it puts a nice divot or a nice straight line into the material. The scratch marks, I got this tool at Harbor Freight, and it's just a kind of like a big Dremel tool. It's actually made for woodworking, but it puts some very, very nice scratch marks on the entire surface of the blade. But basically, you can mark this up any way you want it. You could even polish it. I was going for that real textured look. After all of the marks are in, I'm going to now do the rough grinding on the bevels before I send it off for heat treating. The heat treating is going to make all of those marks very dark, and then I'm just going to polish away the bevels again. I put the knife in a bevel jig, and I'm just grinding away. You don't want to take this until it's completely sharp. If it's too thin, you stand the chance of damaging it in heat treating. But you do want to get the majority of the bevel grinding out of the way now while it's easy and soft, so it's easy to grind this material. So once the bevels are pre-ground, I gave them to my friend Jason Northgard. He heated them up with his torches until they were cherry red and non-magnetic, and then he quenched them in oil. And what I got back was a hardened blade. He didn't harden the tang, but he hardened the blade. So the blade is now dark. And what I'm going to do is just hit it lightly with emery to bring up some of the polish on the high points, and then I'm going to repolish the bevels. So right now the bevels are very dark, carbonized, and I'm going to go back over to the belt sander to polish them. Now, the plan was to put them back in the bevel jig and regrind them right on the platen on the front of the belt sander. I decided not to do that, and I decided to polish those bevels on the upper portion of the 2x72. This portion does not have a platen, and that belt then kind of wraps around the blade, and it gives you a very distinct curved bevel. And I just thought it fit this blade a little bit better. Very rough, rustic looking blade, and I wanted the bevel to kind of go along with that. I also didn't polish that bevel. I left it very gritty with that 80 grit sandpaper. All right, so here I've moved on to the bolsters. I've attached some brass bolsters with 2-part epoxy, as well as some 1/8 brass pins, and then I'm back on the 2x72, just bringing it into size so that it matches the top edge of the tang. I also made some very unique wood chip micarta scales for this knife. I'm not going to show you the whole scale making process. I actually did a complete video on that, and I'll post a link. But these scales work and attach just like any wood scales would. I'm going to, or I cleaned the blade or the handle of the knife with alcohol to degrease it. I let that dry, and then I'm applying a 2-part epoxy to both the handle and the scales. And then I'm going to put 2 1/4-inch brass pins through that. I just use vice grips. It makes it easier to push those pins through. I push them all the way through until they're protruding on both sides. And then I'll clamp this whole mess into a vise, and also use some additional clamps to really clamp those scales onto the tang, completely and firmly. And then I walk away from this overnight. I let it dry overnight. For me, that's probably the hardest part of the whole process, is to walk away from it, because at this point the knife is really starting to take shape, and it's really starting to look like something. Once that 2-part epoxy is dry, you can shape those scales any way that you want to. You could use a disc grinder, a belt sander, an oscillating sander. You could basically anything you want. I just use the tools that I have. I went to the 2x72. I did most of the rough shaping on that 2x72 belt sander. And then once I was finished getting the basic shapes done there, I went over to a Dremel grinder. The Dremel is a very nice little tool. It really does a nice job on curves, so you can really curve the top corners of the handle, make it really fit nicely into the palm of your hand and fit comfortably into the palm of your hand. The only thing I did after the Dremel is I did hit it with a oscillating sander, 220 grit on the sander, and then I did polish the scales on a buffing wheel. It just brings that micarta to a nice shine. But that's basically it. A very simple, very rustic Big Cleaver with hammer peened blade and a wood chip micarta scales. Finished product of the finished blade. This will be going out to my client shortly. This one's going to be a little bit hard to part with, because it happens to be a very unique looking knife. And, depending on what color background you put it on, the scales almost take on a different color. You can see here it almost looks much lighter, of course, in the sunlight. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please check us out on the web at DIYEasyCrafts.com. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much.